The applause had already started before anyone realized the guest of honor was quietly slipping away. At the far edge of the candlelit garden, where expensive laughter drowned out genuine conversation, Evelyn Pierce rose from her own birthday table with the practiced smile of someone who had spent years pretending celebrations meant something. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath hanging lights. A string quartet played another polished melody, and executives competed to outdo one another with gifts wrapped in satin ribbon. Yet no one noticed the birthday woman walking toward the empty library inside the mansion until a small voice drifted across the silence. "Excuse me, ma'am. I made something for you." Every conversation stopped, not because the words were loud, but because they did not belong in a place where everything had a price tag. A little girl, no older than 6, stood clutching a folded sheet of construction paper decorated with crooked stars drawn in bright crayons. Beside her stood her father, shoulders relaxed, one hand resting lightly against her back as if reminding her she could step forward only if she truly wanted to. He wore a clean denim jacket faded by years of honest use, shoes polished carefully despite their age, and the calm expression of a man who had learned that dignity never needed permission. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Someone whispered that security must have made a mistake. Another quietly wondered whether the charity staff had invited the wrong family. Calvin Brooks heard every word, yet his attention never left his daughter. He simply gave her a reassuring nod. Naomi crossed the remaining few feet and offered the handmade card with both hands. Evelyn accepted it automatically, expecting another generic birthday greeting prepared by an assistant. Instead, the first line made her breathing falter. She read it once, then again. The smile she had worn for cameras all evening disappeared without warning. Her fingers tightened around the paper as though afraid it might vanish. Around them, confusion spread faster than curiosity. Directors who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts stared at one another without understanding why their famously composed CO suddenly seemed unable to move. Even Margaret Ellis, the house manager who had served Evelyn for nearly 20 years, lowered her eyes as though she recognized something no one else did. Naomi waited patiently, rocking gently from heel to toe, unaware that every adult in the garden had forgotten the expensive presents stacked behind the birthday table. Calvin finally took one respectful step forward. "If this isn't the right time," he said softly, "we can leave." Evelyn looked up so quickly that her chair scraped against the stone patio. Her eyes settled on Calvin's face with an expression that was neither recognition nor surprise, but something far more unsettling. It was hope colliding with a memory she had spent years trying to bury. Before anyone could ask what had happened, she reached toward the little girl with trembling hands and whispered 5 words that left the entire garden frozen. "Who told you about her?" Calvin did not answer immediately. He looked down at Naomi instead, giving her the same quiet smile he always did whenever the room around them became too loud. She nodded once, completely unaware that dozens of strangers were staring at her as though she had broken some invisible rule. "I did not tell her anything," Calvin said gently. "She made the card herself." The words only deepened the silence. Evelyn lowered her eyes to the paper again. The front showed nothing more than crooked balloons, a smiling sun, and the words "Happy Birthday" written in uneven blue crayon. It was the sentence inside that refused to let go of her. "I hope nobody has to celebrate alone today." Her fingertips lingered over the childish handwriting. There was no signature she recognized, no hidden message, no clue explaining how a little girl could have stumbled onto the one fear she had hidden from the world for almost 15 years. Daniel Cho stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, would you like me to handle this?" Evelyn answered without looking at him. "No." It was a single word, calm but firm enough to stop him where he stood. Around the garden, conversations resumed in cautious whispers. Some guests assumed Calvin was chasing publicity. Others guessed the little girl had been coached for sympathy. Olivia Grant quietly opened her phone, already calculating how quickly an awkward moment could spread across social media if someone recorded it. Margaret, however, continued watching Naomi instead of Calvin. The child had wandered toward a stone bench beside the garden path where an old wooden birdhouse hung from a maple tree. She crouched beside it, smiling as 2 tiny finches darted in and out. "They still came back," Naomi whispered to herself. Margaret's face changed. Very few people even noticed the weathered birdhouse anymore. Fewer still knew who had built it. "Sweetheart," Margaret asked softly, "why did you say that?" Naomi pointed at the birds as though the answer were obvious. "Because if they remember this place is safe, they always come home." Margaret felt an unexpected chill. Evelyn slowly folded the birthday card and slipped it into the pocket of her evening jacket instead of placing it with the expensive gifts stacked beside the stage. That simple decision did not escape anyone's attention. A handmade card had just been treated with more care than diamond watches, rare artwork, and luxury vacations. "Why?" Calvin sensed the growing discomfort and cleared his throat. "We should probably head home. Thank you for letting my daughter wish you a happy birthday." Naomi reached for his hand without complaint. She had already decided the evening was over. But before they could take more than 2 steps, Evelyn spoke again, her voice steadier now, carrying across the entire garden. "Please stay." Every executive turned toward her in disbelief. Evelyn Pierce had spent years ending conversations as quickly as possible during personal events. Tonight she was asking complete strangers not to leave. Calvin hesitated. His instinct told him that remaining might only invite more misunderstanding. Yet something in Evelyn's expression reminded him of people he had met years earlier at the mobile library, people who borrowed books not because they loved reading, but because they were searching for somewhere they did not have to feel alone. Then Naomi looked toward the mansion through the open library doors. Her eyes settled on an old music box resting beneath a framed family photograph, and before anyone could stop her, she quietly asked the one question that drained every trace of color from Evelyn's face. "Daddy, why is there another little girl in that picture who looks like she was waiting for me?" The question hung over the garden with a weight no child could possibly understand. Evelyn turned toward the photograph almost unwillingly, as though simply looking at it might awaken something she had spent years forcing back into silence. Before anyone else could speak, Calvin walked calmly to Naomi's side and rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That is a question we do not ask unless someone wants to answer it," he said softly. Naomi lowered her eyes at once. "I am sorry. I did not mean to make anyone sad." Evelyn watched the exchange carefully. There was no embarrassment in Calvin's voice, no attempt to impress the wealthy guests with perfect parenting. He had corrected his daughter with kindness instead of fear, protecting both her dignity and Evelyn's. It was such a small moment that most people overlooked it. Evelyn did not. Margaret quietly stepped forward and offered Naomi a small plate of birthday cookies from a nearby table. Naomi smiled, but shook her head. "Thank you, but Daddy says we only take food after everyone else has eaten." Calvin could have accepted. The drive home was nearly 40 minutes, and dinner had been postponed because they had rushed across town after the library's community coordinator unexpectedly asked them to deliver a collection of children's books that had been donated in Evelyn's honor. Instead, he nodded approvingly at his daughter. "We will wait." Daniel noticed the exchange with growing suspicion. Either this man was remarkably sincere, or he was performing better than anyone Daniel had ever met. He quietly instructed one of the event staff to verify Calvin's identity. While the employee stepped away with his phone, Evelyn continued studying the father whose clothes suggested modest means while every decision suggested quiet confidence. Her attention shifted when Naomi wandered toward a shelf. Inside the library where dozens of children's books sat untouched beneath a thin layer of dust. "People do not read these," Naomi asked. Margaret sighed. "Miss Evelyn collected them years ago." "Then why are they lonely?" the little girl whispered. Nobody answered. Calvin walked to the shelf and noticed several library cards still tucked inside the books. Each one had been stamped more than a decade earlier. Without asking permission, he carefully straightened a crooked row, returned one book that had been shelved upside down, and quietly repaired a torn page with a strip of clear archival tape he carried in a small pouch clipped inside his work bag. It was an old habit from maintaining thousands of children's books in the mobile library. He finished in less than a minute and stepped back without mentioning it. Evelyn noticed anyway. "You knew exactly how to repair that page," she said. Calvin shrugged. "Books last longer when someone treats them like they matter." Before Evelyn could ask another question, Daniel returned holding a tablet. His expression had changed completely. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "everything he told us checks out. He really does drive the county mobile library. But there is something else." Daniel hesitated, glancing toward Calvin before lowering his voice. 3 years ago, he quietly turned down a $200,000 private contract because accepting it would have forced the library to close services in several low-income neighborhoods. Evelyn looked back at Calvin in stunned silence. A man struggling to raise a daughter alone had willingly walked away from enough money to change his life. Why? Before anyone could ask him, Margaret suddenly froze as she opened the birthday card one final time. A tiny folded slip of paper, hidden between the construction paper layers, fluttered onto the floor, and the moment Evelyn saw the faded drawing on it, she whispered a name she had not spoken aloud in 15 years. The tiny sketch lay on the polished hardwood floor as though it had been waiting years for someone to discover it. Evelyn bent down before anyone else could reach it, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the faded paper. With extraordinary care, it showed a child standing beside a handmade birdhouse beneath a maple tree, holding the hand of a smiling woman. Across the top, written in uneven pencil, was a single name: Claire. The guests exchanged puzzled looks. None of them understood why a simple drawing could leave one of the most respected business leaders in the state unable to speak. Naomi peeked toward the picture, but Calvin quietly guided her eyes away. "Some memories belong to the person carrying them," he whispered. Evelyn heard those words, and they struck her almost as deeply as the drawing itself. Most people crowded closer whenever they sensed a secret. Calvin had chosen to give her space instead. Daniel, however, was growing increasingly uneasy. Too many coincidences had appeared within a single evening. A handmade card, a hidden sketch, a child asking about an old family photograph. He stepped aside and called the community library coordinator, whose name appeared on the donation paperwork. Within minutes, the answer came back. Calvin had never requested this invitation. Earlier that afternoon, another volunteer had become ill, and Calvin had accepted the delivery route simply because he was already driving nearby with the mobile library. The assignment had been completely random. Daniel stared at his phone. If the visit had not been planned, then how had the little girl uncovered memories nobody outside the household even knew existed? While suspicion continued spreading among the executives, Margaret quietly carried the drawing toward a nearby reading table. "Miss Evelyn," she said gently, "look at the bottom corner." Evelyn turned the paper over and noticed a tiny gold star sticker almost hidden beneath the fold. Her breathing stopped for a second. "She always used these," Evelyn whispered. "Every drawing Claire ever finished had one little gold star." Naomi suddenly reached into the pocket of her small sweater. "I have one too," she said innocently, producing an identical sticker sheet. Several guests immediately looked at Calvin, waiting for an explanation that might connect the impossible coincidence. Calvin examined the stickers, then smiled faintly. "Our library gives these to children every Friday after reading hour." Naomi refuses to use the last one because she says every sheet deserves to stay complete. The answer sounded perfectly ordinary, yet it somehow made the coincidence feel even stranger. Evelyn slowly sat down beside the old bookshelf, unable to take her eyes off the drawing. "Claire used to say the exact same thing," she murmured. Olivia, sensing the evening slipping beyond anyone's control, quietly suggested ending the party early before rumors began spreading. Daniel agreed. The board members had already started whispering about possible manipulation, hidden motives, even an elaborate publicity stunt. Calvin overheard enough to understand what was happening. Without defending himself, he simply took Naomi's hand and thanked Margaret for her kindness. "We have caused enough disruption," he said. "It is time for us to go." Evelyn looked up immediately, clearly wanting to stop them, but before she could stand, the landline telephone inside the library rang with a sharp echo that silenced the room. Margaret answered, listened for only a few seconds, then slowly covered the receiver. She turned toward Evelyn with a stunned expression and said, "There is an elderly woman on the line from Saint and Care Center. She says she just saw the drawing on the live event stream, and she insists it belongs to Claire because she was the one who taught her how to draw that exact birdhouse." The call ended, but the silence it left behind seemed even louder than the ringing telephone. Evelyn slowly stood, her eyes fixed on the drawing as though it had become a doorway she had never intended to open again. "Saint and Care Center closed its children's program years ago," she said quietly. "The woman on the phone should not even know Claire's name." Daniel immediately asked Margaret to verify the caller's identity. A few minutes later, she returned with a puzzled expression. Her name is Ruth Gallagher. She volunteered there nearly 20 years ago, and the records confirm she really did teach children's art classes. The revelation shifted the room. Until now, everyone had assumed the evening was driven by coincidence. Now there was someone outside the mansion connecting Naomi's drawing to a forgotten piece of Evelyn's past. Calvin remained where he was, saying nothing. He understood how easily curiosity could become intrusion. Naomi gently tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, did I do something wrong?" He knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people cry because something reminds them that love was real. That is different from being hurt." Evelyn overheard every word. She had spent years surrounded by polished speeches, carefully rehearsed condolences, and expensive gestures that never reached her heart. Yet this father explained grief to his daughter with a simplicity she had never managed herself. Even so, another question refused to leave her mind. Why had Naomi drawn a birdhouse almost identical to the one Claire had loved? Margaret carefully examined the folded sketch again before noticing something everyone else had missed. The paper itself was unusually old. Its edges had yellowed with time, unlike Naomi's bright construction paper. "This was not made today," she whispered. Calvin looked genuinely surprised. "Naomi, where did you find that little paper?" The child frowned, trying to remember. "Inside the storybook with the blue bird on the cover." Calvin's expression changed for the first time that evening. "The donation box," he murmured. Earlier that afternoon, volunteers had loaded hundreds of donated children's books into the county mobile library. Naomi had spent the drive organizing them, while Calvin focused on the road. Neither of them had inspected every page. Had the old drawing been hidden inside one of those books for years? Daniel immediately asked where the donation had originated. Margaret checked the inventory sheet that accompanied the library gift. The books had come from a storage warehouse after renovations at one of Evelyn's former community literacy centers, a building that had remained locked for more than a decade. Suddenly, the impossible coincidence began to look like an accident waiting years to happen. But if the drawing had truly been hidden inside a forgotten book all that time, who had slipped it there, and why had it resurfaced? On this particular birthday, Evelyn slowly reached for the old sketch once more, then stopped when she noticed faint writing pressed into the back of the page, almost invisible beneath the aged paper fibers. It was not part of the drawing. It looked like someone had written a message and erased it long ago. Margaret carefully tilted the page beneath the reading lamp, and as the light caught the faded pencil marks, one unfinished sentence quietly emerged, beginning with the words, "If Mother ever finds this." Margaret carefully lifted the fragile page beneath the reading lamp, and the faded pencil marks became clearer with every slight adjustment of the light. The unfinished sentence continued just enough to change everything. "If Mother ever finds this, tell her the birdhouse is where I kept my happiest days." Evelyn covered her mouth. Nobody else in the room could have known those words. Years earlier, Claire had hidden tiny treasures inside the wooden birdhouse she had built with her father, treating it like a secret mailbox for memories she hoped would never disappear. After Claire passed away, Evelyn had been unable to look inside it even once. The birdhouse had remained untouched, hanging in the garden through every season, not because she had forgotten it, but because opening it felt like saying goodbye forever. Every guest who had doubted Calvin only minutes earlier now looked toward the maple tree in stunned silence. The coincidence was no longer centered on a father seeking attention. It was centered on a forgotten memory finding its own way home. Daniel lowered the tablet in his hands. For the first time that evening, he realized every background check, every suspicion, and every whispered theory had pointed in the wrong direction. Calvin had never asked for anything. He had simply delivered books, protected his daughter, respected Evelyn's privacy, and repeatedly tried to leave before causing discomfort. Naomi looked toward the birdhouse with innocent curiosity. "Daddy, is that the safe place the birds remember?" Calvin squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe it is." Evelyn slowly walked across the garden, each step carrying the weight of 15 silent birthdays. She stopped beneath the maple tree and stared at the weathered wooden birdhouse that everyone else had ignored for years. The paint had faded, one corner had cracked, and ivy had nearly reached the roof, yet it still stood exactly where Claire had left it. Margaret quietly handed Evelyn the small brass key that had remained in the household safe since the day the birdhouse was locked. Evelyn accepted it, but her hand trembled so badly that she could not raise it. She looked back toward Calvin. He did not encourage her. He did not offer advice. He simply remained beside Naomi, allowing Evelyn complete ownership of the moment. That restraint spoke louder than any comforting speech could have. Olivia noticed the executives watching with entirely different expressions now. The humble library driver whom many had quietly judged was no longer an outsider standing at the edge of an exclusive celebration. Without asking for recognition, he had become the one person everyone instinctively trusted to protect the dignity of a deeply personal moment. Yet one obstacle still remained. What if opening the birdhouse destroyed the last comforting illusion Evelyn had been carrying all these years? What if it was empty? What if the message referred to something that had already been lost forever? Evelyn closed her eyes, took one slow breath, and inserted the tiny brass key into the weathered lock. The mechanism resisted at first, then released with a soft click that echoed through the silent garden. As she slowly opened the little wooden door, something small slipped from the compartment, landed gently in the palm of her hand, and Calvin recognized it immediately before anyone else could speak. Resting in Evelyn's trembling hand was not a piece of jewelry or an old key, but a tiny wooden library card no larger than a playing card, its edges worn smooth by countless small fingers. Calvin recognized it immediately because the county mobile library still used the same handcrafted design for a children's reading program that had begun decades earlier. On the back, written in faded pencil, were 3 simple words: "Keep reading together." Beneath them was Claire's careful signature. Evelyn stared at the card as though time itself had folded into the present. Margaret quietly wiped away tears. "She earned that after finishing her first reading challenge," she whispered. "She insisted it was more valuable than any trophy." Naomi looked up at her father. "Daddy, that is why books are treasures." Calvin smiled softly. "Yes, sweetheart, because they help people find each other even when years have passed." The guests who had arrived expecting another polished corporate celebration now stood in complete silence. Expensive gifts remained unopened while a weathered library card held everyone's attention. Daniel lowered his head, remembering every doubtful thought he had entertained about Calvin. He stepped forward. "Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology. I judged your intentions before I understood your character." Calvin offered an easy smile. "You were protecting someone you respect. There is nothing wrong with that." The answer surprised Daniel even more than the apology itself. There was no resentment, no desire to prove he had been right all along. Evelyn watched the exchange carefully. The man she had first seen as an unexpected guest had every opportunity to embarrass those who had questioned him, yet he quietly gave them dignity instead. That choice changed the atmosphere more than any explanation could have. Olivia slowly lowered her phone and slipped it into her purse. Recording the evening suddenly felt disrespectful. Around the garden, executives who had spent years competing for Evelyn's approval found themselves reflecting on something much simpler. None of them had remembered the lonely woman behind the successful company. Calvin had never tried to impress her. He had simply treated her like a human being. Naomi then noticed the little wooden card had a tiny ribbon loop attached to one corner. It was hanging on something, she observed. Margaret nodded slowly. Claire tied it around a small music box she loved. Evelyn's expression changed again. The music box. She looked toward the library shelves where the old wooden box still rested beneath the framed family photograph. Until that moment, everyone had assumed the birdhouse contained the final memory. Now it appeared to be only the beginning. Evelyn carefully placed the library card against her heart before walking toward the shelves. Every step seemed lighter than the last. Yet hesitation remained in her eyes. If the music box still held another message, opening it would mean facing the final piece of a chapter she had avoided for 15 years. Calvin quietly reached for Naomi's hand, prepared to leave if Evelyn wished to continue alone. But before he could turn toward the garden gate, Evelyn stopped beside the music box, looked back at him, and said with quiet determination, "I cannot open this without the 2 people who unknowingly helped me find it again." Calvin exchanged a quiet glance with Naomi before following Evelyn into the library, not because he believed he belonged there, but because refusing her request now would leave her carrying the weight of the moment alone. Naomi slipped beside Evelyn without saying a word, her small hand resting gently against the woman's sleeve as though reminding her she did not have to face the next memory by herself. Evelyn carefully lifted the weathered music box from the shelf. Dust shimmered beneath the warm lights as she slowly turned the tiny brass key. The melody that filled the room was simple, delicate, and unmistakably familiar. Margaret closed her eyes, recognizing the lullaby Claire had begged to hear every night before bed. For the first time in 15 years, the music no longer sounded like a farewell. It sounded like an invitation to remember without fear. As the final note faded, the false bottom of the music box quietly released with a soft click. Inside rested a neatly folded letter tied with a pale blue ribbon that had almost faded to gray. Evelyn's hands trembled too much to untie it. Calvin did not reach for the letter. He simply said, "Take your time. Some pages wait years because they deserve to be opened at the right moment." Evelyn smiled through tears and slowly unfolded the paper. It was not a goodbye. It was a list written in Claire's careful handwriting titled, "Things I Hope Mommy Never Stops Doing." The first line read, "Keep putting books into children's hands because stories make lonely people feel found." The second said, "Please celebrate your birthday even if I cannot be there, because I will still love birthdays with you." By the time Evelyn reached the final sentence, her voice had almost disappeared. If someone kind ever helps you smile again, do not let them leave too quickly. No one in the room spoke. Every expensive decoration outside suddenly felt insignificant compared to the quiet truth resting on a single sheet of paper. Daniel slowly removed the event program from the podium. "Tonight was supposed to celebrate a successful company," he said softly. "Instead, it reminded us what success was supposed to protect." Olivia lowered her head, ashamed that she had worried more about appearances than about the woman standing in front of her. Evelyn gently folded Claire's letter and turned toward Calvin. "You arrived carrying donated books," she said. "But you gave me back something I believed was gone forever." Calvin answered with the same humility that had guided every choice throughout the evening. "Your daughter left it for you. Naomi and I only happened to be the ones who carried it home." Evelyn looked around at the executives, board members, and longtime employees who had witnessed the entire journey. "Beginning tomorrow," she announced, "every children's reading room our company has ever funded will reopen. We will restore the literacy centers we closed, expand the mobile library program across the county, and every child who walks through those doors will know Claire's story began with a book." A quiet wave of emotion swept through the room as applause rose naturally instead of out of obligation. Naomi looked up at her father with a proud smile, while Evelyn carefully placed the letter back inside the music box, knowing its purpose had finally been fulfilled. Yet before the evening came to an end, Margaret noticed something tucked beneath the velvet lining that no one had seen before, and she gently whispered, "Miss Evelyn, there is one last envelope addressed to someone who has not arrived yet." Margaret carefully lifted the final envelope from beneath the velvet lining and turned it over. Across the front, written in Claire's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For the person who helps Mommy smile again." Nobody in the library breathed for a moment. Evelyn slowly accepted the envelope, but instead of opening it herself, she looked toward Calvin. "I think this belongs to all of us now," she whispered. Calvin gently shook his head. "No. It belongs to the future your daughter believed you would have." Evelyn smiled through tears and carefully unfolded the letter. Claire's words were simple, exactly as a child would have written them. "If you are reading this, Mommy is probably smiling again. Please thank the person who reminded you that birthdays are for sharing love, not counting who is missing. Tell them to keep giving books to children because every story helps someone find their way home." Evelyn lowered the letter against her heart as years of loneliness finally gave way to peace instead of sorrow. She walked toward Calvin and Naomi, then knelt so she could meet Naomi at eye level. "Would you let me keep your birthday card beside Claire's letter?" Naomi smiled without hesitation. "Yes, because cards are happier when they have friends." A soft laugh spread through the room, the first completely genuine laughter of the evening. Outside, the string quartet quietly began playing again, but now the music no longer sounded like background entertainment. It sounded like life continuing. Over the following months, Evelyn fulfilled every promise she had made that night. The abandoned literacy centers reopened one by one. The county's mobile library doubled its routes, reaching neighborhoods that had not seen a book truck in years. Calvin never accepted a special title or executive office. He simply continued driving the library bus each morning, greeting every child with the same kindness that had changed one unforgettable evening. Naomi became the first volunteer at every reading event, proudly handing out little gold star stickers to children who finished their books, always saving one sticker on every sheet, because she still believed every page deserved to stay complete. One crisp autumn afternoon, nearly a year later, the bright blue mobile library stopped beneath a familiar maple tree. Evelyn was waiting beside the restored birdhouse with a group of neighborhood children carrying armfuls of books. The cracked wood had been carefully repaired, but one small weathered corner had been left untouched as a reminder that love does not erase every scar. As birds fluttered in and out of the little house above them, Naomi looked up at her father and whispered, "They remembered the safe place." Calvin smiled, watching children race toward shelves filled with stories instead of expensive gifts. Across the garden, Evelyn quietly placed the handmade birthday card beside Claire's letter inside the music box before closing it one final time, not to lock away the past, but to preserve the moment two little girls, separated by years they would never share, somehow found each other through kindness, a forgotten drawing, and the simple gift of a book. The applause that had once celebrated success had long faded. Yet the quiet joy filling the garden now was worth more than every standing ovation that had come before. Thank you for watching until the end of the video.